this brother here, Marc Little. He is Black Voices for Trump Advisory Board member. Marc, it's great to have you on HeartCity. Welcome home, brother.
Brother, it is so good to be with you. And I've been listening, and what Paris has shared with you and your audience is just extraordinary. And I'm so glad to be with you on HeartCity.
So Marc, let's get into this, man. You have one of the hottest seats in the country. I mean, Black Voices for Trump. There's visceral reaction, right? Some folk are going, yes, I get it. I love it. I understand it. On the other side, there's many challenges, frustration, and quite frankly, America has become this polarized space anyway. Tell the broadcast audience why you support Donald Trump for presidency.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I can tell you that I have been a conservative for a long time, a conservative before I've been a Republican or a Donald Trump supporter. And as a conservative and as a pastor and a lawyer, by the way, there are certain core values for me that I prioritize. I prioritize the life of the unborn, obviously in the womb. But I believe in a womb to the tomb policy. I believe that we have to stand against illegal immigration. I think you know that the Obama administration's Civil Rights Commission found that illegal immigration most and disproportionately impacts Black workers. And so I stand for a nation that is sovereign, a nation with borders. I stand for more jobs. I stand for making sure that people have the opportunity to wake up every day and with the power of their mind and their hands are able to create their own destiny. And that means that government has to play its proper role. The bigger that government is and the more that it makes people like you and me dependent, the weaker we are. You might know that in 1987, I was shot. I was shot by a Crip in Los Angeles and I lost my leg. I was given the opportunity to have a disability check that would have paid my rent for a time to come. I decided that having my rent paid by the government was not the road for me, that I wanted more out of life. And that's the kind of policy that Donald Trump stands for. If you can get up in the morning and decide that you want to work, you want to get an education, you want to make something of yourself, really government needs to get out of your way to do that. Government can't create your destiny. And so I was happy to be able to go to law school and make something of my life, to get an education and to work hard. And that's the kind of environment that Americans need today. An environment that stands for life, an environment that stands for government playing its proper role so that as Americans we can flourish. And that's the kind of environment that Donald Trump has created. And so when Donald Trump came along and he said to Hillary Clinton and to all of America that he's going to stand against a taxpayer-funded abortion, he got my vote. When he understood and said that as a businessman, he knows how to create jobs, or at least create the environment for jobs. Government doesn't create jobs, right? Small businesses create jobs. Government gets out of the way. And so Donald Trump deregulated our environment that created the space for the small business owner to create. He under the Donald Trump presidency, you might know, manufacturing jobs grew 714% faster under his administration. These are the kinds of things that we need to be successful. And so I gravitated happily toward the Donald Trump presidency. And as we look back, we see that not only did he do that for the country before the pandemic hit, but he did that for the African-American community.
Now, you bring up a great point that I think is really important to park in the notes of this broadcast. Government does not create jobs, and this is not a partisan conversation. I need people to understand government does not create jobs. It either accelerates the creation of it or decelerates and causes those jobs to actually leave. And so those policies, taxes, tax plans, all make a difference in what's going to happen in the space. For Black America, Mark, you know this well. Things are not happening and moving the way that they should. Many will claim and say, quite frankly, that the Obama administration gave millions of jobs to the country. And in this current space, we're now seeing a deficit and potential collapse of the economy under President Trump. You and I both know that that's happening in conversations in Black America, whether it be the church or the barbershop. What would you say to those individuals who have that mindset, who are listening and watching the broadcast?
Sure. Thank you so much. You know, it's interesting because there's two things happening. You have the wealth gap between whites and blacks. It's been huge and has been historically very wide. And then you have the workforce participation numbers. And so what I'd like for us to do is to focus on what happened before the pandemic, because the entire globe has been impacted by what has come out of China. Before the pandemic hit, we had one of the highest workforce participation rates in recent history. And for the Black community, we had the lowest unemployment rate in recorded history, both for African Americans and for African American teenagers, which has been historically high. And so the question becomes, well, why is that? And like you just said, we have to look at the policies that this president has put in place that allowed that. And so often we ignore the fact that illegal immigration has an impact on that. And we have no Black leaders, as we talk in our barbershops, we have no Black leaders who are standing up and saying, we need to stand against these caravans. We need to stand against the barrage of folks coming across our border, taking jobs. I think it's really important to underscore that since President Trump has been in office and all the flack that he took with the bans for people coming into our country illegally, it has worked for the African American community. And the manufacturing jobs that President Obama said there is no magic wand to make those jobs come back from being offshore, the jobs that he and Joe Biden so willingly shipped across our shores. They came back in droves. And those things helped to bring those numbers down for African Americans. 5.1% unemployment rate for African Americans as of December of 2019, the lowest in recorded history. And so I want people to understand that we have to look at what has happened under his watch before we were rolled over by the pandemic. Now, since the pandemic, we've had almost 11 million jobs come back, and most of the country is still on lockdown. Can you imagine what's going to happen when we reopen under a Donald Trump presidency as opposed to a Biden presidency? Mr. Biden has been clear that he is going to follow the quote unquote science that says we may be locking this country down again. I remind people under the CDC, there is a 99.99% recovery rate if you are 0 to 70 years old. And there is about a 94% recovery rate if you're 70 and over. And comorbidities, of course,
also provided that you don't have any pre-existing conditions as well. I think it's important. Yeah.
The comorbidities have a play into that. Obviously, if you've got diabetes, if you've got cancer and those sorts of things, it's impacted greatly. And by the way, those are the populations that are most vulnerable that we absolutely have to protect. We have to wear a mask. I'm here in Las Vegas right now with my father, who the world knows has cancer. My father's Floyd Little, played for the Denver Broncos, and he has cancer. And so I'm here having tested negative for COVID, wearing a mask when necessary to make sure that he's protected. And we have to do that for our loved one. And so there's a role to play for wearing masks. But we can't ignore the science that our Democrat friends say that we should follow. And the science says is that there's nearly a 100% recovery rate for those who are not in the vulnerable category. And so all I'm trying to say, though, back to your point, is that under Donald Trump presidency, we have experienced a record economy for the nation. and a record unemployment rate for African Americans. We can't ignore that. That's the fact. And so I'm looking forward to Donald Trump making America great again as we come out of this pandemic. We are turning the corner. The rate that we should be looking at is not how many new cases we have, because we know we're testing more than anybody in the globe. What we have to look at are the deaths and the hospitalizations. Those rates are the ones to look at. There are spikes, obviously, but ultimately that's what we have to look at to determine how we reopen our nation. We have to reopen our nation. We have to see a bright future ahead of us. I'm talking to those in the barbershop and in our churches. There is a bright future for us, but we cannot live in a spirit of fear. That is not going to be the recipe that's going to bring us back from this very horrible, horrible pandemic. A spirit of hope, a spirit of being willing to get back into life and to recover from this. Our small businesses are hurting. They're closing. The mobs that have burned down our cities are going to have an impact on our small businesses coming back. But together we can do it, and we will do it. And the president and our local government and our mayors, our governors are going to have a big role to play in coming back from this pandemic and from the mobs who have burned out a lot of our small businesses.
Let's talk about law enforcement, because I think law enforcement is a big issue for Black America. I mean, if we're going to be honest about it, those slave patrols literally matriculated into what we now know as police forces and law enforcement. Black America still has not found itself comfortable with neither policy or, in some cases, the conditions by which community and law enforcement engage. When they hear law and order, in many cases, it becomes a dog whistle for a supremacist mindset. Officers who do not live in the community now engaging the community in a top-down, hard thumb-nose approach. And so many, when they hear the concept of law and order ever emanate from the mouth of the president, they turn off, because in their mindset, he is responsible for driving the narrative. They're driving what's happening in the community, and as it relates to community and engagement between these officers. What would you say to Black community members? And obviously here in Philadelphia, we just had an officer involved shooting. So tensions are high. There are things going on in the space. But what would you say to the general thought around law and order in the Black community?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an important question, Malik. You've got looting going on right now as we speak in your city, and I have to tell you, I'm so glad to be able to speak to it because it's a bifurcated issue. You've got the federal response. And then you've got the local response. Yeah. You've got a president who has worked with Senator Tim Scott to try to put bipartisan legislation together. But on his own, he implemented an executive order that banned the chokehold and so many other things. He gets it, and he is responding from his perch, if you will. But the real reality is twofold. I want people to understand that, number one, law enforcement, there are some 18,000 agencies across our nation, and they are managed by local government. They're managed, in many cases, by mayors and chiefs of police, many of whom are Black and they are Democrat in most of our urban centers. And what people need to understand is that they are responsible for electing the leaders over them, over us. We are responsible for holding our mayors, our chiefs of police, and our police departments accountable to us. And if we're not engaged at the local level in saying to those mayors, to those city council members, and ultimately to those chiefs of police, that we need our officers to have community policing. There's a theory that you may know of called broken windows, where we are really in partnership with local policing, that we are a part of that process. And we need to hold them accountable to keep us a part of that process. There are commissions where local community members sit and bring accountability to our police forces. And we have a role to play. The role is not always sitting outside of the glass, if you will, and shouting inward. We need to be inside, bringing about the change that we're talking about. I was a part of that in Los Angeles, where we brought body cameras to play in local policing. It's important that we step up and play the role that we need to play as members of our community. That's number one. Number two, it's important to understand what's happening with policing in context. We have so often in this season followed a false narrative. Now, I want to be very clear. Anytime one African American is shot, the Tamir Rices of the world, the Eric Gardners of the world who are choked and can't breathe, the George Floyds of the world who lost his life because of a knee on his neck. We have to stand against those injustices. As a lawyer who has done criminal justice work, I understand that as a need. But it's complicated because we had a crime bill in 1994 that Joe Biden authored and promoted that put us away for a third strike that was nonviolent, that was drug related, or for stealing pizza. We have to understand our role in the legislative process. We have to understand the narrative in our role when you have in 2019, 13 unarmed Black men and one woman who were shot by police. 13 unarmed. And we have leaders, Malik, who are trying to lead us to believe that we're being lynched and shot in the streets of America without cause. And so we have to do the work to understand what's really happening in our communities. One life lost is one life too many. But I don't want us to follow behind Pied Pipers who have an agenda. And the agenda, frankly, has not been to protect our lives. 81% of African Americans polled want more law enforcement. But you wouldn't know that if you're listening to the quote unquote leaders in our community who want us to believe that we're being lynched and gunned down in the streets of America. The most vulnerable among us are elderly, are handicapped, our youth who are going to and fro from schools, God willing, when we get from this pandemic, who have to go through gang-infested communities, need law enforcement. We can't stand down and act like law enforcement doesn't play a role in the safety in our communities. It does, but we do need to stand for better training. We need to stand for officers who look like us and who are from our community, who get us. And that is something that we need to stay on the target. We need to continue to push that. But the idea that we have to have less law enforcement is only going to leave us more vulnerable, and we have to stand against that.
Do you feel that President Trump will keep a commitment, keep his word to Black America? Obviously, we know Ice Cube sat down with him. Paris talked about the fact that, and I believe this too, that Ice Cube did not go to grab anything for himself or to accumulate anything for his own. I do believe that he represented the interest of Black America in both meetings. Nonetheless, there was a plan. It was called the Platinum Plan. I necessarily don't agree with the term platinum, but nonetheless, there was a term used in reference to a plan specifically for Black America. Do you feel that that commitment will be kept and the dollars will hit home where it needs to in the Black community?
Great question, man, and thank you for it, because it's an easy answer. You know a tree by its fruit. You have to forgive me as a pastor. You know, I look at the world through a biblical worldview. You know a tree by its fruit. When he was a candidate, Donald Trump said, Black America, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? Because the Democrats, for now more than 50 years, have been promising us change, and our communities have not changed. But guess what? They have gotten far richer than they were when they entered office. They're the ones who have benefited from the last 50 years. Our communities have not. Donald Trump said, what do you have to lose? And what is the fruit from that tree? And Paris may have touched on this, but the fruit from the tree has been the Futures Act, where our historically Black colleges and universities were failing. They were on lifelines. And Donald Trump, through the Futures Act, gave them long-term funding, $250 million, $300 million in forgiveness in debt. 250,000 students, most of them Black, were the beneficiaries of that. The First Step Act, 91% of those who were in federal prison who are now out, who had life sentences, 91% of them were African Americans. And they're sitting around the tables of our families, being fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters again. That's Donald Trump keeping his promise. And so the Platinum Plan, and I agree with you, I'm not sure where he came up with the word platinum,
Right.
But it offers a $500 billion in commitments to small businesses to have access to capital. Guess what? That's what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about the week before he was assassinated. An economic plan for African Americans. This is the closest thing that I've heard in recent history that will speak to that dream that Dr. King was talking about. And by the way, in the Platinum Plan, churches are allowed to compete for federal dollars where they never were before. And guess what? That's what Donald Trump already did for historically Black colleges and universities under his executive order. He lifted the ban that was placed on faith-based schools who were unable to compete and request those kinds of funds. So he's already doing what he plans in the Platinum Plan. He's talking about 3 million new jobs for African Americans. He's talking about 500,000 new businesses, Black businesses. Can you imagine a new Black Wall Street? Can you imagine the Black Wall Street that was burned down in Greensboro being supported by this administration to come back for our community to stand strong again? Black Wall Street was the epicenter of our country for Black culture at that time in the early 1900s. It's that kind of commitment that Donald Trump is making. I don't understand how African Americans can say no to that, particularly when the Democrat Party, unfortunately, said to Ice Cube, I'll talk to you about that after the election. No, now is the time to talk about it when we're voting on this stuff. Now is the time to step up and make the commitment. Now is the time to say to African Americans, we're going to bring you along. We've been promising it for too long. Here is the plan for African America. We don't have that from the Democrat Party, but we do have that from Donald Trump, who, by the way, has already made promises made, and promises have been kept. That's what we need to be focusing on. African Americans need to stop thinking about party and start voting our self-interest. We need to stop thinking party and start voting our self-interest. Donald Trump has made promises and he's kept them. That's what we need to be looking at.
Listen, I will always be one to say that we should make sure that our agenda is kept no matter who is in office. That's the only way that we will accumulate power and keep power. Also, I firmly believe that power does not concede to anything without demand, but it's still not finished there. It's demand and consequence. If we don't have the consequences, nothing changes. I don't care who's in office. 30 seconds, Mark, as we close this interview. The broadcast audience is listening. What do you want to tell them about November 3rd?
Well, again, thank you so much. It's really a joy to speak to you and to your listeners here. Look, we've got the most consequential election of our lifetime. African Americans are a conservative community. Life is on the ballot. Capitalism is on the ballot. If you look behind Joe Biden's plans, he's promoting a different America. Don't vote party, vote your interest. Our country and our families depend on it. I'm praying for you. I'm blessing you. I'm thanking you for the opportunity to be with you. God bless you. And thank you so much.
Marc Little, the Black Voices for Trump Advisory Board member. Marc, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you and all you do.
Have me back, brother.
Yes, sir. Will do. So